You may be seated. The court is now back in session. We once again hand the floor to the defense team for inquiry to continue putting questions to the witness Suong Si-kun. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Your Honors. Sir, I want to move now to the part where you were discussing your duties as spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm referring to in particular Khmer EIR number 00832164 to 65. French, it's 00833107 to 09, I believe. And it's in English 00833228 to 29. So here you're asked a question about your duties as spokesperson, and you indicate, and you're asked about who your direct superior is, and you state the following. Ieng Sary was my direct superior. However, in some sections or tasks, I directly worked for Pol Pot in his capacity as the party's secretary. In that capacity, he would assign me to any task legally. And so I wanted some clarification, particularly in light of your answers earlier today. You're saying here that he would assign you in his capacity as party secretary, and these would be legal tasks. Is he acting in a different capacity here than he would in the other instances you spoke of today, where he would just make decisions because he is Pol Pot?
That is the principle of the appointment in regards to the party. The subordinate shall follow the orders or instructions from the superior, and the minority shall respect the majority. Pol Pot, in his capacity as the party secretary, he can assign any task to any of the party's members directly, without having to go through the direct superior of that party's member. And that is the principle of organization.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Well, perhaps you can help us out here then. If we move to another section of your transcript, and this would be, again, August 6th, and it's Khmer 00832188 to 89, French 00833145, and English 00833260. Here you were asked a question, if you had any contact with Nuon Chea during the DK period. And your answer, or part of your answer, is that Nuon Chea requested that you prepare an article about a democratic Kampuchea foreign policy. And that was the only occasion that you had with Nuon Chea. Do you see that part of your testimony, sir?
Yes, that was my statement.
And the clarification that I'm seeking at this time is, in what capacity did Nuon Chea ask you directly to write an article on the foreign policy of democratic Kampuchea? What authority did he have over you? You've told us that Pol Pot, by virtue of his position, could order anybody, including you, to do anything. What about in this instance?
Noon Chi at the time was the deputy party secretary, so he also had the authority to contact directly with party members.
Okay, thank you. One final question in this area. You told us what they could do legally as secretary and deputy secretary of the party. Did they need to get clearance from Mr. Ieng Sary in this instance? Or did they do, yeah, let's stick with that. Did they need to get clearance from him to allow you to carry on these functions?
I could not know for sure, but in certain circumstances it was not necessary, as Pol Pot would deal directly with any of the party's members.
And when he would deal directly with you, and we understand you had a personal or a friendly relations with him because you had known him for quite a bit, but in dealing with you in particular and assigning you tasks, did you always run those tasks by Mr. Ieng Sary in advance, or did you carry out the tasks as instructed by Pol Pot?
When it comes to the task assigned to me directly, then I would deal with him directly without the presence or without having to consult with Mr. Ieng Sary.
And if Pol Pot were to ask you to not disclose what you were working on his behalf, were you obliged to follow those orders? Or because you were working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you had to report that to Mr. Ieng Sary?
If I worked directly with him in my capacity as the party's member, I had no obligation to report that to Ieng Sary. In the case that he asked me about that task, then I would report to him. But if he did not ask me, then there was no need for me to report. Because in regards to Pol Pot's position within the party, he was above Ieng Sary.
All right. And so, just to make sure I get it right, so if he were to ask you or order you to keep something secret and not disclose it because of his position, were you obligated to follow his order?
Yes, that was sure. As a party member, I had to respect his instruction.
And that would not be considered insubordination with respect to Mr. Ieng Sary. That was perfectly legal in a sense, if we want to put it in those terms.
Witness, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the question asked by defense counsel is a leading question by and large. And I would intervene here to say that this question is not appropriate. Counsel Carnavas could have the witness confirm statements, is trying to have the witness confirm statements that he is, conclusions that he's making on the basis of that passage, and I think this is not appropriate.
Mr. President, I'm asking for clarification. If one looks at my question, it's predicated on the facts that come from the witness himself, not facts that I am suggesting to the witness and for the witness to confirm. So if it's appropriate, he may answer. If you find that it's not appropriate, I'll move on.
President, regarding the question put by the counsel, the chamber is of the view that the objection and its ground by the prosecution is valid. So please, counsel, could you rephrase your question? That's point number 1. And point number 2, please try to avoid any hypothetical questions or the ones that draw conclusion by the witness, which are of course inappropriate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, witness, I'm not asking you to speculate, but simply to assist us so we would understand the structure and how things operated. I'll just move on. I think I'll leave it at what we have thus far. Let's talk about meetings. This was a topic that was raised by the prosecution, and we can see in the same page that you talk about that there were various types of meetings, and in the context of describing these meetings on the following page, and I will read the ERN numbers, Khmer 00832165, French 0083310809, and English 00833230. You state that the MFA was divided into 2 sections. One was the department section, and the other was the bureau section. And the bureau dealt with production, security, food, for example. The department section, it dealt with diplomatic affairs. And they were under different organizations, under the different party branch organization. And I want to discuss a little bit about the structure of the MFA. And perhaps you can assist us in bring some clarity to this. You worked in the department section, if I understand your answer correctly, because it deals with diplomatic affairs. Is that a fair conclusion to draw from your answer?
No, that was the opposite. At B1, that is MFA, it was divided into two. One was the bureau. It dealt with production, security. And as for the department, it deals with the practical diplomatic affairs. I fell under the diplomatic department, that is to deal with the diplomatic affairs.
All right. So you were not with the bureau. Let me move on for the sake of moving on. If we could look at, I want to look at some of your statements.
Duty Council, you may proceed. Duty Council, good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors and everyone. The witness just stated he worked at the department, not at the bureau section of the MFA.
I don't think there's a dilemma there. That's exactly what I said. I asked, it was a question, there was no answer, so I moved on. If we go to the following page, well, if we go to the following page, you do explain that the bureau section had a party branch, and so Madame Sorse was the party secretary, and I was a member. This is what is in the transcript on page 44, or Khmer 00832165 to 26, French 0083310809, and English 00833230 to 31. This is why I'm asking for some clarification. And then on another passage, you talk about meetings of the party cell. And this would be in Khmer 00832172 to 73, French 00833120 to 21, English 00833240. And so I would like now to clarify some matters. You're telling us today that the way you understood it was you were in the department, and within the department you were with the diplomatic section. Do I have that correct?
Let me clarify it once again. My duty counsel just clarified the matter as well. The MFA divided into two. One was the bureau and one was the department. And I worked within the department section dealing with diplomatic affairs.
Okay. And where there were meetings, who was chairing the meetings within the diplomatic section of the department? Would that be Madame Saurse?
Madame Sosai was the chair during the meetings as she was the head of the party branch.
And I believe this is the same person that you mentioned earlier, that you would turn over your work product to pass on to Pol Pot in your when you were working, drafting those articles for information and propaganda. Do I have it right?
Yes, it was just same person.
Now, were you physically, well, let me rephrase. Where were you physically located, your office, keeping in mind that you worked in many different places or had different tasks? Where were you physically located at the time?
My office was located in the curved glass house. It is currently the Council of Ministers' office. And my personal office, if you entered from the right-hand side, it was the first room. So people who came to work, including those cadres, before they reach their respective offices, they would first came into my office.
Okay. And was that in B1?
Yes, it was within the compound of B1.
And can you tell us how many buildings were in B1?
There were a number of buildings. Which were used as offices. And actually that building, the curved glass house, was used as offices. And another office, which was a one-story villa, was not used as an office. It was a residence, and behind that there would be the accommodation for the cadres and the combatants, and that would be 4 or 5 buildings behind that.
Thank you. Now, if we could look at E3/100, this is a statement that you provided on 17 December 2007. You made several statements, and we're going to go through some of them. This is the first one that we will go through. Khmer 00204147-48, French 00344699-700, and English 00223636, or page 3. And here you're asked to explain the management structure of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I want to go through part of your answer, and hopefully you can clarify some matters. You state here, at the time, the Foreign Ministry was called B1. Mr. Ingsuri was chairman. There was a general secretary and office chairman, Sao Hong. I suspect it's So Hong. This office was divided into a security section with P. Pun, alias Chiem, as chairman. Madam Sao Se was chairperson of the General Secretariat, chairperson of the protocol section, and secretary of the party branch. The general political section had Ingsuri himself as the chairman, And in it were a number of intellectuals like Ok Sokun, Mr. Chun Praset, and Mr. Ki Chun, and others. The Propaganda and Information section had me as the chairman. In late 1977, Mr. Ni Khan was chairman of the Protocol section as a successor of Madame Sao Se. Mr. Ni Khan had previously been a sector secretary in the West Zone. The Party Affairs section had separate people in charge whom I did not know. Let me stop right here. Do you stand by your answer here, where you describe Mr. Ingsari as the chairman, then So Hong as general secretary, and under him, Pi Pun being the chairman of the security section?
Yes, I stand by this statement.
All right. And then you describe what Madame Sauce did, chairman of the General Secretariat, chairperson of the Protocol Secretary, and secretary of the party branch. It would appear from this answer that she's holding 3 different positions. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Now, at some point, and we'll get to it, hopefully, you've indicated to us that the secretary at the embassies was actually the most important person, more important than the ambassador. Do you recall making that statement?
Yes, that was my statement.
In fact, for the record, it can be found on Khmer 00832199 to 200. I believe that's where it is. Yes. English 00833 273 to 274, and French 00833 160 to 62. Now, I just have a point of clarification. Would she be the equivalent of the secretary, as you described in the embassies?
Mr. President, I'd like the Council to clarify his question. If he wants me to compare the status of the party secretary within an embassy to the role of the secretary of a party's branch. Mr. President, Council, could you please clarify your question, as the witness does not fully understand it? And could you make a clear distinction under the term secretary as you referred to, whether the secretary was also the head of a section or of a department, and a secretary in the sense of a party secretary, and also the distinction between the ambassador of an embassy or a secretary of that embassy stationed in a foreign country.
Thank you. Well, that's the clarification that I am seeking, and I'm not trying to fix powers or authority to anyone, just for some clarity. Well, let me go about it another way. What exactly was her function at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as you understood it at the time?
As far as I know, the Council would like to know about the duties of Madame Sosa. Am I correct?
Yes, in her various capacities.
In practice, he was the secretary of the party's branch, but she had no real authority because above her there were Sohong and Ieng Sari. Her role was mainly in leading the meetings, and that was it. And the result of the meeting would be reported to either Sohong or Ieng Sari, and I did not have detail about that. Just to recap, her main role was the responsibility in the General Secretariat, in charge of preparing the documents, in the reception of guests and the materials, and likewise that applies to the protocol section because these two sections were so busy at the time.
Thank you. Now, further down, before I go further down, you state that you mentioned Sohong, and what was your understanding of his position? What were his responsibilities as General Secretary and Office Chairman?
In fact, his role as the General Secretary had nothing to do with the diplomatic affairs section. He dealt directly with the bureau sections, that is dealing with the production, with the security, etc., as well as dealing with the security for those foreign guests visiting Cambodia. He did that in coordination with P. Poon and certain other cadres.
All right. And I take it since you were, at least in 2007, you were aware that P. Poon was the chairman of the security section. Did you know him back then?
I knew P. Poon in 1975 when I went to work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He told me that he was in charge of security, providing the protection for diplomatic residents, diplomatic compounds, and all those diplomats and diplomatic representatives stationed in Cambodia.
Thank you. But it would appear, at least from your statement here, that you knew him as the chairman of the security section. Did you know him as the chairman of the security section back then? Did he carry that title?
Let me clarify that at that time I knew him in his capacity as being in charge of security for the diplomatic personnel, but I did not know any other duties that he carried out.
All right. Now, sticking with Sohong for a second, in your statement of 13 March 2009, and I'm referring to E3/372, Khmer would be 00290420 to 21, French 00290431 to 32, and English 00290420 290426. And you were asked a question here: were these two structures subordinated to Ing Sari, meaning the Bureau and the office? And you state here, in principle, yes, in principle, but in practice, since Pol Pot's nephew was the head of the, quote, office, unquote, the former could decide whatever he wanted without consulting Ing Sari. And then you say it was the same for the diplomat section. And then you give an example. Do you see that passage, sir?
Response: yes, I do.
Now, you inform us here that So Hong was Pol Pot's nephew. Of course, this is 2009. Were you aware that he was Pol Pot's nephew between 75 and 79? Did you have that information?
Response: yes, I was.
And do you know what sort of a relationship he had with his uncle, Pol Pot?
Response: no, I didn't know that at that time. I only learned about it after 1979. And the person who told me all about this was close to me. And practically Pol Pot did not like So Hong, because So Hong was a person, I may say, a person of middle path. He was not very determined, and he used the term, quote-unquote, not a floating person. So he did not trust him very much. That's what I was told.
Right. And may I ask who told you this information and when?
Response: Counsel, may I wish not to respond to that question, please?
Very well. I'll respect that. Well, let's go back to from 75 to 79. Were you able to observe his interactions with his uncle at the time? If there were any, that is.
Response: I do not recollect the details, but so far as I remember, when I worked every now and then with Pol Pot, I did not see Sao Hong there. It was only Ieng Sari who was present. This suggests that he had nothing to do with the diplomatic section or matters directly. And I contacted Pol Pot on the diplomatic affairs. For example, because we had to prepare the black paper issue on September 1977.
Thank you. Now, when you say that this is what it meant, are you not drawing a conclusion?
ខ្ញុំ
Response. Mr. President, I do not understand Council's question.
I'll move on. I'll go step by step. Did you know So Hong's relationship, working relationship that is, with Pi Pun, also known as Chiem, prior to 75?
Response. Before 1975, I didn't know these two individuals.
Did you ever learn at that time, that is between 75 and 79, whether these individuals ever worked together prior to 1975?
Response. No, I didn't. As I indicated, I had never known these two people before 1975.
Well, my question is not whether you knew them. I'm asking whether you learned between 75 and 79, whether these two individuals ever worked together. And if I understand you correctly, the answer to that question is no. Is that right?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
And do you know whether these two individuals, prior to 1975, had any connection with Pong?
The President, witness, could you please hold on? International Court Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The witness has just answered that he did not know So Hong and Chiem before 1975 and that he did not know if they had worked together. And now we're asking the witness once again if they had any kind of relationship with Pong. So I don't think the witness could answer this question. He did not know these individuals before 1975. So asking questions that the witness won't be able to answer is not something that is acceptable.
Mr. President, now that we gave the witness the answer, my question was whether he learned between 1975 and 1979. Now, he's in situ. He's in B1. And obviously, he might have learned something during that period. And my question is, did he know? Now, the prosecution brought out the name Pong in 870. And the witness indicated that he knew of him and, in fact, described one incident with a gentleman. And now I'm asking whether he learned. It's either yes or it's either no. If it's yes, how so? If it's no, I'll move on.
Response. No.
Thank you. And I've just been told by my colleague that in Khmer, learning and knowing has the same word. So there may be something lost in translation, and my apologies if I'm pushing you in a direction which may seem unreasonable. Very well. Now, do you know, between 1975 and 79, whether So Hong had any dealings with or connections to Pong?
Response. No.
Same question with Chiem, Pi Pun. Do you know whether Pi Pun had any dealings with directly or indirectly, with Pong?
Response: No, I don't know this either.
Can you please tell us whether P. Poon, where P. Poon's office was located?
Response: People was located in several locations. Rather, people had no office.
Okay, does that mean that he was floating around from building to building, including yours?
Response: It appeared to me that he had only a place to stay and he had to float from one place to another, performing his duties.
All right. And when he was floating, was he also floating in the building where you had your office?
Response: Yes, he just paid a visit and dropped by, saying a few words, and then he left.
All right. And so I take it from this answer, from 75 to 79, when he was floating in and out of the office where you were working in, you would have occasion to meet with and speak to P. Poon, a.k.a. Chiam.
Response: I believe I could have talked to him, but I also believe that the conversation was more on a conversational basis rather than digging into the duty or task we performed.
And why not dig into the duty and task that he was performing? Why not ask him any questions concerning that?
Response: It was embedded in the principle of the CPK. People only minded their own business. People were advised not to dig into other people's business. If I had to ask people about his tasks, I would have breached the CPK's principle. I was not afraid of the party, but I was afraid that if I could have done so, people would denounce me of breaching the CPK's principle.
Well, thank you. And that's what I was getting back earlier when I asked the question about secrecy, and the slogan being that secrecy is 50% of winning the revolution. That's part of the principle, right? Not to know, or only to know what you're supposed to know.
Response:
What would happen to you if you were to pry in, if you were to be asking him questions about his tasks? Let me flip the question around. What if he on his own were to disclose to you information that you were not entitled to know? Was that permissible under the...
The President's witness is instructed not to respond to question that begins with if, because it suggests that the question itself is hypothetical.
Did the principle also apply to others? Not just asking information, but also giving out information. And I don't want you to speculate. I want you to tell me, from your personal experience,
Response. This principle applies to everyone. We did not wish to know information about others, and they also did not wish to know what they're not supposed to know.
and if you were to be disclosing information that was confidential and secret to you, to what you were working on, were there any repercussions to follow?
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. President, it's the same situation as before. The question begins with, if ever you had communicated information. This, again, is a question relying on speculation, Mr. President.
The President, the objection is sustained. Witness is instructed not to respond to that question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will avail myself to objecting on every instance the prosecution does this, because otherwise we will not get any testimony from anyone. And simply because a question starts with if, it is not speculating. It may be in some foreign language, but it isn't in English. I'm not asking the gentleman to speculate. I'm asking him on the procedure. He's here to give evidence on the structure. And he's an insider. He would know. He told us personally what would happen if he asked questions. I'm asking him personally what would happen to him if he gave away secret information based on his experience, his knowledge. He lived through the period we have not. I accept your ruling, though I must say I disagree with it, but I respect it. Thank you. Let me turn now to another part of your testimony, 00832171-72, French 00833119, English 00833238-39. This is again on August 6th. And you're asked a question, and you provide the following answer concerning important events. You say normally when there was an important event, they would share it with members of the meeting. And then you go on to say, to the following question, to the next question, I cannot recall it clearly. He did not tell us frequently concerning the decision of the Standing Committee, but he did not even mention that it was a decision of the Standing Committee, but rather he mentioned that it was a decision of the party. So it was a collective decision by the party. So, given that we're on the topic of speculating and assuming, can you please tell us, how can you possibly say that this was a collective decision, or these were collective decisions, when you have also told us, based on the prosecutor's questions, that you never attended any Standing Committee meetings? Are you not, sir, speculating here when you say that these are collective decisions.
Response. Mr. President, I do not understand the expression speculation here in his question. The President, Counsel, you are advised to rephrase the question because you use the term speculate, presume, or assume in the question that is part of the wordings that should be avoided in putting question, and the witness appears to have problem understanding the question, so you are advised to rephrase it. The question should be brief, precise, concise indeed, and that the witness is able to understand it and respond to it precisely. People who are good at putting questions also be good enough to make sure that the response can be made. It's not really that good at putting questions, then you never expect that people could answer to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's take it step by step. You were asked by the prosecutor whether you had attended any standing committee meetings or whether that they had provided you with any information of their meetings. And the answer to that question, I believe, was no. Do you stand by that?
Response, yes.
And just for the record, lest there be any question that I am making this up, we can find it on 00832200, French 00833162, and English 00833274. Now let's go back to this part of your answer, where you're asked about the standing committee or meetings. You're asked about information that was imparted, and the question is, but can you remember if, from time to time, or regularly, he, being Mr. Ingsari, talked about decisions that are being taken by the standing committee of the party central committee? This was the question posed. Your answer: I cannot recall it clearly. He did not tell us frequently concerning the decision of the standing committee, but he did not even mention that it was the decision of the standing committee. But rather, he mentioned it was the decision of the party. So it was a collective decision by the party. Now I want to focus on the last part, where you say, so it was a collective decision by the party. If you did not attend any standing committee meetings, how would you know that it was a collective decision by the party?
Response. I stated that Mr. Ingsari did not tell me that the decision was of the standing committee, although I do not recollect the full message. That decision was the common decision by the party or the collective decision by the party. But as usual, the decision made by Pol Pot alone represents the decision made the party, the decision made by the party already, and other people would then agree with such decision.
All right, if I understand your... Now, let me go back earlier. Today you testify that Pol Pot would issue decisions on his own. Do you recall saying that?
Response: yes, sometimes he had the authority to make his own decision as the secretary of the party.
And so what you're saying now is that only in those occasions Pol Pot would make decisions on his own. That's your testimony under oath.
Response: I do not know this very well, but in some instances he did not have to meet with others before he made the decisions. So far as I know, that's what I stated. Indeed, I have taken an oath, and I still I still stand by what I said under oath, and you repeat this. It's like knocking my head by repeating that I make the statement under my oath. The President, Council, could you please be now advised to refashion your line of question and try not to demoralize the witness by way of putting your question. We understand very well altogether that this witness has taken an oath, and his oath taking notes also well recorded. And we can also verify to make sure for the record that at the beginning of the trial that he took this oath before the chamber.
If we go to Khmer ERN 00832172-73, French 00833120-21, English 00833240. Here you're talking about these party cell meetings.
The President, Council, please repeat the ERN numbers again, because it was read out too fast that it could not be properly rendered into Khmer.
In Khmer is 00832172-73. French, it's 00833120-21. English 00833240. This is again from the transcript of August 6th. And here you say that there were two branches of the party. The party subordinate to the ministry and the other one to the party cell of diplomatic affairs. And then further down you say that the members of the ministry party cell were myself, Mr. Tukamdun, Kichun, Chuprasith, Sopan, and you say that Sopan was his personal secretary. May I ask what was being discussed at these party cell meetings? And since these individuals were members, and we know that Ki Chun and Chu Perset are alive and well, would they be willing, would they have information concerning what was happening at these meetings?
The President, witness, could you please hold down? International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make 2 points. First of all, the quotation is only partial. It's not complete. I want to draw the Chamber's attention to this fact. The Defense Counsel did not say that Ieng Sary chaired the 2 cells of the party. Secondly, Counsel is inviting the witness to speculate as to what other persons may have known regarding the contents of a meeting, and I don't think the witness is the right person to give that information.
If I may respond, first of all, the prosecution is notorious for taking things out of context or reading only parts of the answers. So I'm not doing anything that is not being done all the time, and nor are we denying that the transcript says Ieng Sary. The thrust of the question is, he's indicated who the members were. Now, I'll forego the last part of the question, but does he stand by his answer that these 2 individuals, Ki Chun and Chu Perset, were members and were sitting in on the very same meetings that this gentleman was sitting in?
The President, I would like to hand over to Judge Cartwright, please.
Thank you, President. Mr. Carnavas, could you restate the question, please? Because you've dropped part of it, but we need to be clear which question you are now asking. Thank you.
Apologies. Simply, do you stand by your testimony that these were the members of the party cell and that they were attending the meetings along with you?
Response. Yes, I know that they attended the meeting because I was member of the cell. The President interrupts. It is now appropriate time for lunch adjournment. Before we adjourn, we would like to ask counsels for Mr. Ieng Sary as to how much time he would like to put questions to this witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Apologies. I will need the remainder of our time that was allotted to the defense, which was 2 days. I believe I will need the entire Monday morning with the gentleman. I would say that I'm going to I'm about halfway through my material. I will go and streamline, and I believe that there's room to streamline, and keeping in mind the admonitions of the court, I will try to be as brief as possible, but I don't want to mislead the trial chamber. I will try to finish within the first part of the morning, but I cannot guarantee it. I think I will need the entire morning, but there is a possibility that I could finish earlier. Thank you.
The President, Counsel, if witness is willing to give his testimony this afternoon so that his session is fully concluded by the end of today, what would you say about this? We have just obtained information that if his testimony can be concluded by this afternoon, he will do his best to make sure that the testimony session is concluded by today. He is willing to go back home as soon as possible because he has been here for several days already.
I think that can be accomplished the whole afternoon. I'll spend the lunch period refashioning my examination, but I think I can accommodate the gentleman. I only mentioned Monday because of the half days.
The President, thank you, Counsel. Mr. Sung Si-kun, can you advise the chamber whether you can bear with us for this afternoon session, or you stay healthy enough to give testimony for the rest of the day? Response. Mr. President, I am doing my best, but I am afraid that I may not be able to proceed to the afternoon session. I may need a few days to rest, because if failing to take some good rest, my health will be worse. And according to my observation of the questions by counsel, I believe that without good rest, I am not able to respond to the questions to the full capacity. I can be back on Monday if you wish, and by that I believe that I can recoup and regain my strength to be healthy enough to respond fully to the questions posed to me. The President, thank you very much. The Chamber grants your request, and we follow what you asked. And Counsel for Mr. Ieng Sary can proceed with the remaining questions by Monday. Mr. Sung Si-kun is invited to return to the courtroom by Monday morning along with his duty counsel. So the next session for Mr. Sung Si-kun testimony will be Monday next week. Court officer is now instructed to assist Mr. Witness. working with the Western unit so that Mr. Sung Sikun can be properly assisted and return to his home, and have him return to the courtroom by Monday next week by 9 a.m. Counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client Nuon Chea would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell, as he is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a general lack of concentration, and we have prepared the waiver for you.
The President. The Chamber noted the request made by Mr. Nuon Chea through his counsel, in which he has asked that he be excused from the courtroom and be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell due to his ill health. Counsel has already indicated that he would proceed with the submission of the waivers signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nuon Chea in due course. The Chamber therefore grants such request. Mr. Nuon Chea is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell through video link, and he has expressly waived his right to participate directly in the courtroom. Counsel is now advised to submit the waiver signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nuon Chea as soon as possible, and AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the AV equipment is well linked to the holding cell so that Mr. Nuon Chea can observe the proceedings from there for the remainder of the day. And security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan to their respective holding cell and return Mr. Khieu Samphan back to the courtroom in the afternoon session when the court resumes. The Chamber wishes to inform the parties and the public that during this afternoon session, the Chamber continues hearing testimony of witness Saw Siak. Questions continue to be put by the prosecution. The court is adjourned.
សម្រាប់ចុះ
សូមក្រោកឈរ